Hi, so welcome back. So I am going to cover still security services. And then in the security services, we are on part 2. And then in part 2, actually, let me show you where we were before. So what we did was I'm actually covering this part. So this is the detection, which is the continuous monitoring, in which we were covering CloudWatch, CloudTrail config, and then we did the first part, and now we were going to be doing the second part, right? So let me just go back to where we left off. So that's where we did. So we did cover how EC2, ECR work along with Inspector, Security Hub, and Event Bridge, and how the logs such as AKS, VPC flow logs, and DNS log work along with GaurdDuty, sending those findings all to the Security Hub, which will display that in a nice dashboard. And then anything happening unusual is going to trigger Event Bridge, and Event Bridge is going to trigger Lambda function and SNS. Once again, the Event Bridge and CloudWatch events are now one and the same thing. Before they were different, but now they're put together. And then they're going to trigger a Lambda function to take any remediation action, such as patching or isolating a compromised EC2 instance, or sending a notification to my security team that certain things have been or has been happened, right? So that's covered in the previous part, and now this time I'm going to be talking a little bit more about, I would say, the CloudTrail config and some other services. So this time, again, I will be using ChatGPT because that's a very nice way to complement my slides. Okay, so now doing exactly what we did last time. I will be dropping those services in here, and then we'll be putting a question into ChatGPT to get more details of the questions, right? So let me just do this thing. Excuse me. Awesome. Okay, so we put an S3 bucket here. We have some CloudWatch, we have CloudTrail, and then we have the console, SDK, IAM, and CLI. And I will tell you in a bit why I am putting them there. So what CloudTrail is going to do is going to send its finding to CloudWatch, to S3 bucket, and to GaurdDuty. So what CloudTrail is doing is actually all the APIs that are being made to the console, to SDK, to the CLI or to the IAM. So anything, any calls and API calls, especially whenever you hear about CloudTrail, and if it says API calls, so all the APIs call that are being made to the AWS services are being monitored by the CloudTrail. And then those findings are being sent to S3 bucket, to CloudWatch logs for further analysis, and also putting it in a nice way or a dashboard. And at the same time, triggering certain services, such as a Lambda function or SNS to take certain actions. And also they're sent to the GaurdDuty, and then also the GaurdDuty is going to send that to Security Hub. And now in the Security Hub, you're going to have a much more comprehensive view of all the security events happening in your AWS, right? So let me see what I have next. So here you go. We drop a CloudWatch alarm, SNS, Lambda function, and then what's happening? The CloudWatch logs is going to trigger a CloudWatch alarm, and then going to trigger the SNS topic, and the SNS topic is going to trigger Lambda function, and the Lambda function is going to take a certain action, right? And then I have some other services in here, but let's just put a nice question into ChatGPT covering this entire part, how the CloudTrail is collecting those APIs, sending it to certain other services, and then triggering other services to take certain actions, right? So what I'm going to do is I have a question like this. So I'm going to put that into my previous chat that we used to have. Let me just pull this a little bit to the side. So those were the previous questions that we covered for the Inspector service and along with the GaurdDuty, and then it gave us some very nice explanation along with a case scenario of how it was doing. So we're using the same chat. going to be putting my question in here. It's a bit longer question, but here you go. Let me put a question in there and then talk about what the question is. So this is, how does CloudTrail work with an S3, CloudWatch logs, CloudWatch alarms, a Lambda function, GaurdDuty in other AWS security services? Also, how does it collect API calls from SDK console, CLI, and IAM? Please explain in detail, step by step, how they work together with a case scenario. Once again, saying a case scenario is a much nicer way because they give you an example, and based on that example, you will be able to understand what the services actually are and how they work together with each other. Awesome. Okay, so that's where it starts, right? So now we see the CloudTrail service that records, my apologies if I'm not able to pronounce it well right now, I'm a bit tired. It says records AWS API calls for your account, delivering the log files to an S3 bucket, right? And then the CloudTrail can work with several other AWS services to provide comprehensive security monitoring and response for your AWS environment. And here's an example scenario broken into different steps, right? So starting again with the CloudTrail, which says enable CloudTrail in your AWS account, start recording API calls made using AWS Management Console, AWS SDK, CLI, and IAM, and configure CloudTrail with S3. So specify an Amazon S3 bucket as the destination for your CloudTrail logs. This will store the log files generated by the CloudTrail. And here it says integrate CloudTrail with a CloudWatch log. So configure CloudTrail to send logs to Amazon CloudWatch. This allows you to monitor, store, and access your log files in a centralized location, as well as set up metric filters and alarms based on specific log events. So this is actually what it is, right? So CloudTrail is going to collect any API calls happening in my AWS environment. Is going to send that to an S3 bucket to be stored. Then also is going to send that to CloudWatch logs, and a CloudWatch log is going to have certain filters or have CloudWatch alarms being triggered, and trigger SNS topic and some other stuff, right? So here you go, and then we have CloudWatch alarms. So create CloudWatch alarms to monitor specific log events or metric filters in a CloudWatch log. These alarms can be set up to trigger action or notification when specific threshold or conditions are being met, right? So this is where it's talking about. And then set up an SNS topic. So the SNS is a fully managed messaging service that enables you to send messages to multiple subscribers. So integrate SNS with CloudWatch alarms to send notification to your security team or other interested parties when specific events happen. So now you see we have a frequent, I would say, use of SNS and Lambda topics, SNS topics and Lambda functions. So Lambda function, SNS, and also CloudWatch events. So those are the services that are being triggered by other services, and then they're going to take certain actions. So again, next up, we have a Lambda function. So Lambda function is a serverless compute services that runs your code without provisioning or managing services, and create a Lambda function to perform specific action in response to CloudWatch alarm notifications, such as remediation action or further analysis of the logs. And then we have Amazon GaurdDuty, which we did cover in the previous part, but still let's go through it. It says Amazon GaurdDuty is a threat detection service that continuously monitors for malicious activity and unauthorized behavior in your AWS environment. And then integrate the GaurdDuty with CloudTrail by enabling it to analyze CloudTrail logs for potential security threats. So the logs from the CloudTrail are being sent to GaurdDuty, and the GaurdDuty is going to analyze that for security threats. And at the same time, the GaurdDuty can send its finding to Security Hub as well. And then integration with other security services. You can further enhance your security services by integrating CloudTrail with other AWS security services like Security Hub, AWS Web Application Firewall, or WAF, and AWS Shield. We will talk about the services in the WAF and the Shield in the third section as well. Okay, so and then the last part, it says step-by-step integration and interaction. So enable Amazon CloudTrail and configure it to send logs to an S3 bucket and Amazon CloudWatch. So that's where it does CloudWatch logs in an S3 bucket. Number 2, create metric filters and alarms in the CloudWatch logs based on specific logs in event pattern. And this is where it talks about it. Integrate CloudWatch alarms with SNS to send notification. Oh, I think so I did mention this one. So now number 4, create AWS Lambda function to perform action in response to an SNS topic. So this is where Lambda is going to respond to an SNS topic by doing something. And then also enable Amazon GaurdDuty to configure it to analyze CloudTrail logs for potential security threats. So that's where it's going to do that action. And finally, integrate CloudTrail with AWS security, with other AWS security services as needed, right? And then in the last part, it says, in this scenario, CloudTrail collects API calls. I think so this is now a very nice summary of what actually we did, right? So in this scenario, CloudTrail collects API calls from AWS Management Console, AWS SDK, AWS CLI, and IAM. So that's where it's talking about it. And then it sends the log data to specified Amazon S3 bucket, CloudWatch logs. So that's S3 bucket in CloudWatch logs. And then it says CloudWatch alarms monitor the logs for specific events and notify your security team or trigger a Lambda function. So now the CloudWatch log is trigger an alarm. Alarm is going to send a notification to SNS and then going to trigger a Lambda function. And also the GaurdDuty analyzed CloudTrail logs to detect potential security threats and help you maintain a secure environment. So finally, this is what it is. So I think so it's now you can see a very nice way of how you can complement your studying for your AWS certification exams with ChatGPT. So for me, what really helped me, so once I completed the courses on Udemy, I kind of summarized everything into slides. For example, I have a different only one slide, everything that's related to networking services, one slide, everything that's related to security services, and one slide, everything's related to, I would say, compute and management services. And then I'm using my slides to complement my learning using ChatGPT. So this is how you can make use of ChatGPT to enhance your learning or kind of reduce the timing that you can spend otherwise. For example, if I was to put this question into Google, wouldn't give me the same amount, I would say really concise and well put kind of material or content for me to understand those services. So I would say that's it for the section. I think so we did cover this part. So I'm going to do another video covering the, I would say the CloudWatch part, and then wrapping up the detection part. I just wanted to make a shorter video compared to a long one. But nevertheless, I am going to be seeing you again in the next section. So bye for now.